I wanted to ask a question. So a couple of presentations that I did face to face before COVID times. That was a lovely time.
When was that?
When was that? I know I don't remember those times, but before COVID times, and a couple of the solicitors I spoke to afterwards had said to me that actually, it's more common than you would think that they have a client who has a will set with them and they actually don't have any family.
Yeah.
And so, and actually once the estate is settled, so, once the kind of whatever the balance of that estate is, if they weren't giving money to charity for our benefit as well, what happens to that money, Simon, in that situation where they don't have family and all their debts are paid and then they have a balance left over? What happens?
One of the first estates that it was the first estate I ever dealt with, the will failed because all the immediate family members, the beneficiaries that the chap had mentioned or put in his will, they all died before him. And what happened was we then had to approach genealogical researchers to construct a family tree. And the estate, it wasn't large. It was about 180, 190,000. And this is a good 20 odd years ago. And after the family tree had been constructed, we then, and this is about 4 years later, I then found myself sending checks for small amounts to people in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, who'd never met the deceased. And that's kind of what happens. So if you don't have any immediate surviving family members that would benefit on an intestacy or that you have put in your will, then most of the estate or a large chunk of the estate will go on research and the admin costs of trying to locate beneficiaries. And then at the very end of it, if no beneficiaries can be identified, then yes, it goes off to the Crown. But that in itself is quite rare. Because the genealogical researchers are pretty good at finding people. But it is just that whole, and this is a conversation I have a lot because of my experience. I will say to people, okay, so you've left, funds down to your children and then your grandchildren. Okay, what happens if they all die before you? Or if we're looking at a wipeout scenario, what do we do then? And then it's right, nieces, nephews, godchildren. Okay, what about a charity? Because the advantage of putting a charity in is that they will, even if they cease to exist, part of the step provisions, the admin clauses that we put in wills, enables executors to advance, to choose a different charity that does or has the same object, so it fulfills the same purpose.
Yes,
so even if the charity that you've named isn't around when the time comes, it will still work. So often it comes up in that way. And now I've completely lost track of what you originally asked me.
It's just asking about what happens when you have money left over in someone and you haven't. So like you were saying, I hadn't appreciated the genealogy would be what would happen. I suspect that some people though maybe not appreciate. It's like you say, 4 years down the line, money has to be spent on that. That's depleting their estate.
Yeah,
so
because what you don't want is your estate to be interesting. That case was very interesting. Genealogical research, heir hunters, the TV program, fascinating stuff. But all of that takes time. And, in that period of time, whoever's going to benefit is the estate is still costing money, funds that could have gone. So in that particular case, if he had said, if all these people die before me, then leave it to this charity or this organization, the legal costs wouldn't have been significant at all, and it would have been wrapped up within a year.
Yeah, so, I know.
Yeah.
So in theory, that's I think it's like in theory, it is even for people who wouldn't have thought about leaving money to charity. I think most people would rather it not be used in fees, or certainly would not necessarily want it to go to people that they've never met and didn't know existed, and they certainly don't want it to go to the Treasury. I mean that's the last place they want the money to go to. When someone's died. So I think there's definitely an argument, a sensible argument for, in that scenario where, like you say, when the will was written, there were surviving relatives or people that the money would have gone to, but as time goes on,
But
Which
in situations where you've got someone without immediate family members, so no children of their own, what have you, um, certain things, certain assumptions are made, which is, oh, right, you're not worried about inheritance tax then because it's not going to affect you, it's not going to affect anyone that's close to you. But of course, there is that. Well, it's not just about the immediate family. There are wider family people that family members that they may wish to benefit, and then charity does come in a lot sooner in that
hmm,
situation, because the
yeah.
conversation is, well, who are you going to benefit if there aren't close friends or other family members that you would want to see have the funds? You clearly don't want it to go to the crown. So yeah, that leaves you with charitable organizations.
And do you know, Simon, is that happening more regularly? Obviously, because we are living much longer and we are getting, there are more people in that situation where they maybe have also outlived their own children or their relatives, and that happens. I mean, just because we
I'm
do have an aging
Yeah,
population,
I still think that it's quite rare.
right?
It's not often that I'm, you're presented with an elderly client that has lost, all their surviving, sorry, all the younger generations. I don't think that happens too often, and I will still say it's a rarity that I'm in front of a client with no immediate family members. It does happen. That's more often the case when you're looking at charitable legacies, that there are no, close family. Let's put it that way, because there can be
Hmm,
family members, but if they're in Azerbaijan or New Zealand, then it's not they're not going to be particularly close. So yeah,
yeah.
but I don't think so. I don't think I'm not seeing more elderly clients without surviving children or grandchildren, but it does, and it can happen. And I think the case I talked about at the start, where my first probate, my first estate administration, the will was about 30 years old. He just hadn't updated it.
Yeah.
So it's not enough to write a will. You've got to treat it as a living document and review it every sort of 3 or 4 years, or at least we used to say every 3 or 4 years. The way things are going, it's almost becoming an annual thing because of all the changes that keep coming in, things that we don't expect, like COVID.